There is a whisper woven through the fabric of time, a murmur carried by desert winds, sung in temple halls, etched into the bones of forgotten gods. This whisper is not of language, but of essence. It is the rhythm of the cosmos, pulsing in tune with a wisdom older than stone, more enduring than scripture. It speaks not to the ears, but to the marrow, the dream self, the still place within. Yet in this roaring din of modern life, this ancient murmur is drowned in algorithms, neon, in the ceaseless hum of progress. We live now in an age where the external world gallops ever forward, while the internal compass rusts in neglect, our eyes fixed on screens while our souls forget how to see. There was once a time when knowledge came not in pixels but in patterns, the spiral of a shell, the arc of a constellation, the way a shadow stretches across a sundial at dusk. The ancients understood that the outer world was a mirror, not a distraction, that every thunderclap, birth and death echoed the divine order of a larger, interconnected whole. Their myths were not myths as we mean them today, but living technologies of the soul, encoded maps for traversing the terrain of being. But we, the inheritors of wires and engines, have reduced such wisdom to folklore and footnotes, quaint relics for museums or poetic quotes for wellness apps. To live in modernity is to live in fragmentation. We are surrounded by systems that isolate the body from nature, the mind from intuition, the self from the sacred. We parcel reality into categories, departments, and platforms, forgetting that the universe never asked to be divided. The ancients walked barefoot on the same earth we now pave over, but their steps left less trace than our digital footprints. They knew the earth not as resource, but as mother, not as dirt beneath us, but as life flowing through us. Their rituals and teachings emerged not to control nature, but to harmonize with it, to honor its cycles, learn from its silence, and bow before its mysteries. But something in us, in all of us, still remembers. A faint echo stirs when we watch a flame flicker in the dark, or when a dream arrives with a strange archetypal clarity. There is a part of us that aches at the speed of the world, not because it is too fast, but because it leaves our spirit behind. And that ache is the doorway. It is the call of the forgotten, the pull of the eternal, trying to find its way back through the static. And perhaps that is why you are reading this now, not to learn something new, but to remember what you have always known. This is not an indictment of modern life. To romanticize the past would be another illusion. The ancients faced their own brutalities, plagues, famine, ignorance. But what they held was a compass forged in something deeper than materialism, a knowing that the visible is only one layer of truth. Their wisdom was not against technology, but beneath it, like bedrock under shifting sand. The tragedy is not that we have advanced, but that in advancing, we have lost the code to our own inner architecture. We have mistaken knowledge for wisdom, information for insight, noise for meaning. There are fragments of the ancient world still scattered like runes across our daily lives, but we often do not see them for what they are. The breath, a sacred act in many traditions, is now shallow and unconscious. The night sky, once a canvas of prophecy and awe, is dulled by city lights and dismissed by science as inert space. Sacred geometry hides in the structure of molecules. Alchemical truths are buried in the language of psychology. And the great initiations, birth, love, suffering, death, have been stripped of their ritual power, rendered clinical, muted, or commodified. In the absence of true initiation, modern life often initiates us by force. Through loss, heartbreak, illness, and failure, we are drawn back into the ancient truths whether we seek them or not. There, stripped of convenience and control, we remember the teachings of the old ones, not as ideology, but as necessity. We rediscover presence not through meditation apps, but through the quiet devastation of surrender. And when all our cleverness fails, we finally listen to the stars, to the wind, to the part of ourselves that has been waiting patiently beneath the surface. This journey into how modern life distorts ancient wisdom is not a condemnation, but a revealing. It is not a call to retreat into nostalgia, but to uncover the threads of truth that still run beneath the asphalt. It is an attempt to dust off the old mirrors and see our modern faces in their reflection. Because perhaps the most urgent question of our time is not how we advance further, but how we remember deeper. What if progress is not only forward, but inward? What if the codes we seek in machines were first etched in myth? And what if healing the fracture between the modern and the ancient is not about choosing one over the other, but weaving them into a new kind of wholeness? And so we begin not with answers, but with a descent, a remembering, a re-entry into the sacred text of the world. Read not with the mind alone, but with the heart, the gut, and the breath. In the next section, we will explore the core themes and concepts that frame this distortion, not as abstract theory, but as living forces shaping our choices, values, and perception. If the introduction was a doorway, a crack in the wall through which the ancient wind began to whisper again, then this section is the passageway. Here we navigate the essential currents that shape the very waters of our time, the illusions that govern our modern perception, the truths we've buried beneath efficiency, and the archetypal architecture that still pulses beneath it all, waiting to be heard like the heartbeat of a forgotten drum. At the core of the distortion lies a simple yet seismic shift. Modern life has inverted the axis of orientation. Ancient wisdom gazed inward to understand the outer world. Modern life gazes outward and often forgets there is an inner world at all. To the ancient mind, life was a dialogue between the visible and the invisible. Dreams mattered. Symbols carried weight. The cosmos was not empty. It was alive, infused with spirit, speaking in signs and synchronicities. But our current paradigm treats such things as decorative at best, delusional at worst. We have traded a living universe for a mechanical one, and in so doing, we've turned sacred participation into detached observation. This is the first major fracture, mechanization of meaning. In the modern frame, meaning is something we invent, not something we uncover. Reality is presented as dead matter. There is no deeper logic, no soul to the world, just atoms bouncing in chaos. But this view, seductive in its simplicity, severs us from the living tapestry that ancient peoples wove themselves into. For them, a storm was not merely a weather event, it was a mood of the divine. A serpent was not just a reptile, but a symbol of transformation, of shedding skins and rebirth. Every object had its echo in the invisible. Everything seen was a doorway to the unseen. The second fracture is the cult of speed. Modern life is designed around acceleration. Fast food, fast news, fast followers. We worship immediacy and efficiency, mistaking pace for progress. But ancient wisdom is slow. It is rooted, cyclical, contemplative. Its fruits ripen over time, often in silence. To truly understand a teaching required apprenticeship, initiation, seasonal patience. Modernity, in contrast, packages truth into bite-sized content, digested quickly and forgotten even faster. The oracle once whispered in caves. Now she is shouted down by trending hashtags. And then, there is the illusion of separation. Ancient traditions across the globe, whether in Vedic India, Taoist China, indigenous America, or mystical Egypt, spoke of unity, of the interconnectedness of all life. They recognized that what happens to the forest happens to the soul, that to harm the earth is to harm oneself. But modern thought, built upon centuries of rational dissection, has taught us to break things apart. Man versus nature, mind versus body, science versus spirit. We live in a paradigm of fragmentation, disconnected from the natural world, from community, from ourselves. Even our technologies mimic this fragmentation. Endless tabs open, endless distractions, constant notifications severing us from presence. Yet despite these fractures, the soul does not forget. There is a tension in the modern being, a longing for integration that simmers beneath the digital static. We scroll not out of joy, but out of hunger. We accumulate data, but crave wisdom. We build skyscrapers, but yearn for grounding. Even in our most modern expressions, artificial intelligence, virtual realities, space exploration, there is a shadow of the ancient urge to know the self, to touch the divine, to return to a primordial harmony that preceded our clever machines. Another essential theme lies in the distortion of the sacred. In ancient times, the sacred was not confined to temples. It was the temple of life itself. A meal was a ritual. A birth was a portal. A death was not an end, but a transformation. Sacredness saturated the mundane. But today, the sacred has been quarantined, either commercialized into spectacle or exiled into irrelevance. Spirituality is often repackaged as a lifestyle brand, stripped of rigor and depth, or mocked altogether. The danger here is subtle. It is not the absence of spirituality, but its dilution. When everything becomes spiritual, nothing truly is. And when ritual becomes performance, the soul goes unfed. Finally, there is the theme of inversion, not destruction of ancient wisdom, but its reversal. Many modern ideologies masquerade as evolution while actually unraveling foundational truths. Independence is exalted over interdependence. Logic is crowned king, while intuition is banished. The ego, once meant to be mastered, is now encouraged to rule. Even our systems of knowledge reflect this. Science once emerged from a desire to understand divine order. Now it often rejects the divine altogether. Medicine, once rooted in harmony with nature, now battles the body as if it were an enemy. Progress has become a god, but it leads us not to Eden, but to entropy, unless we remember the deeper currents beneath its flow. Yet even here, in this distorted mirror of the modern world, the ancient truths remain, like stars behind a cloudy sky. And this brings us to the paradox of our time. We are both more lost and more poised for awakening than ever before. The same technologies that distract can also reconnect. The same crises that fragment can also initiate. The same distortions that mislead can also provoke the question that changes everything. What have we forgotten? And what must we now remember, not as nostalgia, but as medicine? As we move to the next stage of this exploration, we will begin to look not just at the patterns and fractures, but at the stories, myths, symbols, allegories that once served as maps for the soul. These narratives, far from being mere fables, hold within them a structure of truth that modern life has obscured but not erased. To truly grasp how modern life has estranged us from ancient wisdom, we must step into the mythic dimension, the place where truth wears the cloak of metaphor and reality dances behind veils. In this realm, the universe is not a machine to be fixed, but a mystery to be unveiled. It is here, in the symbolic, that ancient wisdom encoded its greatest teachings, truths that could not be spoken directly, but had to be experienced through ritual, myth, and dream. The ancients did not see myth as fiction. To them, myth was the language of the soul, a symbolic structure capable of revealing cosmic laws and psychological truths that the rational mind alone could never grasp. To walk through a myth was to undergo a transformation, to live out a universal truth through the microcosm of story. But in modernity, myth has been demoted to make-believe, and we laugh at the gods who once reflected our deepest yearnings. In doing so, we have not outgrown myth. We have become possessed by it unconsciously. Take, for instance, the myth of Prometheus, he who stole fire from the ones and gave it to man, a hero of rebellion, progress, and human potential, but also a figure of suffering, eternally punished, his liver devoured daily by an eagle. Prometheus is Silicon Valley before it had a name, the champion of technology, of divine theft in the name of empowerment. Yet, like him, we too pay the price of our stolen fire. Our screens glow with knowledge, but we are devoured by anxiety. We are more connected and yet more alone. The myth lives, but unexamined, it haunts rather than heals. Or consider the Tower of Babel, humanity's attempt to reach the heavens through sheer construction, only to be fractured into confusion and dispersion. In our skyscrapers and digital clouds, are we not reenacting the same story? Are we not building towers of data, AI, and control, forgetting the divine humility that once guided our ascent? The wisdom of the ancients was not to reject building, but to do so with reverence, with the understanding that heaven is not seized by ambition, but approached through surrender. And what of the garden, the archetype of harmony, innocence, and original union? Modern life has not destroyed Eden, but paved over it. In the chase for dominion over nature, we have exiled ourselves from its wisdom. But the myth lingers. Deep within the psyche is the aching memory of something lost. A world where we walked with the divine in the cool of the day, where knowledge and being were not enemies, and where the fruit of the tree was not poisoned by pride. The fall is not a curse, it is a map. It tells us what we have become and what we must return to, not backward, but inward. The story of the hero's journey, so central to ancient storytelling, is another thread we've forgotten how to follow. Joseph Campbell unearthed its skeleton, but the soul of the journey is not just a pattern, it is a ritual initiation. In every true life path, there is a call to leave the familiar, confront the abyss, and emerge transformed. Yet in a world that avoids discomfort at all costs, where suffering is pathologized and initiation is absent, we become stuck. We loop in consumerism, medicated from our pain, fleeing the very descent that would transmute us. We want resurrection without crucifixion, wisdom without wandering. Even time itself, linear in modern thinking, was once perceived as a spiral. The ancients saw time not as a line moving forward, but as a cycle of death and rebirth, descent and return. The myth of Persephone descending into the underworld and returning in spring was not simply about the seasons. It was about the soul's necessary passage through darkness to reclaim life. Modern life fears death, hides decay, worships youth. But without the descent, there is no renewal. In rejecting winter, we delay the spring. These symbolic narratives are not confined to dusty scrolls. They live within us still. When we dream of falling, we echo Icarus. When we burn out, we mirror the phoenix, crying for rebirth. When we long for love that transcends the material, we reenact the sacred marriage, the alchemical union of opposites. These stories are not old, they are eternal. But when we forget they are stories, we become trapped in them. We mistake the underworld for failure, not knowing it is the womb of the new. We label the chaos in our lives as dysfunction, when it may be the initiation our culture has refused to give us. Modern life flattens symbols into slogans. It sanitizes archetypes, commodifies the sacred, and renders mystery into content. But the soul cannot thrive on surface alone. It needs depth, it needs story. Not the kind made for marketing, but the kind made for metamorphosis. In this symbolic forgetting, we have not only lost the map, we have forgotten there was a map. We try to navigate heartbreak, purpose, grief, and rebirth without mythic orientation. As a result, many wander in psychological wilderness, seeking guidance from a world that offers only tools but not meaning. Therapy replaces initiation. Diagnosis replaces understanding. Coping replaces transformation. But ancient wisdom, through its myths, offers another path. It tells us that life is not a problem to solve, but a mystery to live. That suffering is not an error, but a forge. That the Buddhists are not gone, only renamed, and they await our recognition. And so we arrive at the threshold. If these stories are still alive, still breathing beneath our modern facade, how do we live in alignment with them? How do we reawaken symbolic sight in a world addicted to surface? The next step in our journey is toward the practical. How this awareness, these ancient currents, can be reintegrated into modern life, not as costume, but as compass. The greatest alchemy is not found in gold or flame, but in the weaving of vision into action. When a truth once hidden in myth, meditation, or the marrow of ancient time finds its way into the breath, the morning routine, the conversation, the conflict, the silence. It is here in this domain of real-world integration that the abstract becomes incarnate, the spiritual becomes embodied, and wisdom no longer resides in books or temples, but in your own heartbeat. The ancient did not aim to know the cosmos for its own sake. They sought to live in alignment with its rhythms. And now, in our fractured, hyper-modern existence, the call is not to abandon the world, but to re-enchant it. But this re-enchantment must begin subtly, like water reclaiming the cracks in dried land. It does not require robes, incense, or pilgrimage, though it may include them. It begins with perception, how we see what we've been taught to overlook. The modern world has trained the eyes to hunger for novelty, for speed, for distraction. But ancient wisdom begins with slowing down, with noticing. The shape of a leaf, the cadence of breath, the way dusk gently leans into night. These are not aesthetic details, but messages. To see the world as alive again is the first act of rebellion. This is not metaphorical indulgence. Science itself, when unshackled from materialist reductionism, reveals the sacred geometry of snowflakes, the intelligence of fungi, the sentience of trees. The ancients intuited what modern quantum theory begins to affirm. There is no true separation. What you think, how you walk, what you speak, all ripple out. And so, integration begins with sacred attention. You light a candle not because it changes the room, but because it changes you. The next movement is remembrance through rhythm. Ancient life was cyclical, synced with the moon, the tides, the seasons, the body. Modern life is linear, relentless, and disembodied. This tension tears at our health, our creativity, our sanity, but the body still remembers. And so we must reclaim ritual, not as superstition, but as structure for the soul. Morning tea becomes a meditation, a weekly walk in nature becomes a return to temple, a shared meal becomes communion. These acts, when done with intention, restore coherence to a life spun thin by fragmentation. Work, too, can be transmuted. In the modern world, work is often a source of burnout, identity, or economic survival. But to the ancient soul, labor was sacred offering. Whether crafting, farming, healing, or storytelling, every act had a spiritual echo. We must return to this frame, not by quitting our jobs and fleeing to monasteries, but by changing our inner stance. Can you bring presence into your craft, no matter how mundane? Can your labor become a form of prayer? When this shift occurs, even emails and errands can become part of a deeper song. And then there is the body, the ancient temple so often ignored, mistrusted, or exploited in modern life. Ancient wisdom honored the body not merely as a vessel, but as a bridge. Movement was a form of medicine. Stillness was revelation. The senses were not distractions, but portals. To reclaim ancient knowing, we must learn again to live in the body, to feel hunger, to rest without guilt, to move not for appearance but for joy. Healing begins not with fixing what is wrong, but listening to what has long been silenced. Technology too must be addressed, not as a villain, but as a force in need of recalibration. The internet, smartphones, artificial intelligence, these are modern flames of Prometheus, powerful, illuminating, and potentially devastating if wielded without soul. Ancient wisdom teaches us to ask, not only can we do something, but should we? Not only what does it produce, but what does it do to the spirit? Real integration means using technology as a servant of consciousness, not its master. Curate your digital life as you would a sacred space. Unfollow what numbs. Tune in to what awakens. Let silence be as present as signal. Then comes the relational field. Ancient cultures lived in tribes, villages, and extended families. Modern life isolates us into boxes, both physical and emotional. But the soul thrives in community, not just social contact, but soulful contact. Connection that is vulnerable, meaningful, and slow. To live wisely today is to cultivate circles of truth. Share meals without screens, speak stories instead of updates, listen without fixing, love without branding. This too is ancient. And finally, we must restore the sacred frame around life's transitions. Birth, adolescence, love, death. Modern life rushes past these thresholds or medicalizes them into events. But the soul demands ritual. When a child is born, mark it with fire and song. When one suffers loss, let grief be communal. When death nears, let stories and symbols prepare the spirit. Ancient wisdom knew that every threshold is a gate, and if left unguarded, trauma seeps in. But when honored, thresholds become transformations. This integration is not about returning to the past. It is about retrieving what was essential from the past and weaving it into now. A kind of soul composting, letting the bones of ancient truth feed the soil of present life. It is a subtle revolution. No banner will wave, no app will notify you that you've succeeded. But one day you will wake up and the world will feel more alive. The wind will speak again. The moon will whisper secrets. You will suffer, but it will feel sacred. You will love, and it will echo eternity. And this is the point. Ancient wisdom was never a set of instructions. It was a way of seeing, a way of being. And that way is not lost. It only sleeps. And you are the one who can wake it. Now we approach the final turning of this journey, the great circle returning to its origin. In the final section, we will draw all threads together into one last breath, a conclusion and a transformational call. All rivers return to the sea, and so too must this reflection return to its source, not in the same form, but transfigured by the journey. We have wandered through ancient echoes and modern noise, traced symbols in dust and pixels, and held up forgotten truths to the neon light of our present age. And now, at this final threshold, there remains but one question. What will you carry forward? To walk away with understanding alone is not enough. Ancient wisdom was never meant to be admired from afar. It was a fire to be held, a seed to be sown, a mirror in which the soul could finally recognize itself. The danger of the modern distortion is not only that we've forgotten, but that we've mistaken remembering for doing. Wisdom is not what we say, it's what we become. There is a quiet revolution needed, one not televised or branded, but lived in subtle defiance. It begins when you look at the world not as material to conquer, but as mystery to honor. It deepens when you reclaim time not as a commodity, but as a rhythm. It awakens when you stop asking what the world owes you and start asking what sacred imprint you are here to leave. In truth, the crisis of modernity is not technological. It is spiritual. We are not lost because we have no tools. We are lost because we have no compass. We have built stairways to the clouds, but forgotten how to kneel. We have turned the world into data and drowned in the overflow. And yet, right now, beneath the noise, there is a still place calling. You've heard it. You wouldn't be here otherwise. Perhaps you hear it when the stars seem to breathe, or when grief strips you of your masks. Perhaps it comes through music, or while watching a child sleep. It arrives when the veil thins. And in that moment, you are not a worker, consumer, algorithm, or brand. You are a being between worlds, ancestor and descendant, flame and clay. To live this truth in a world that forgets is no small act. It requires courage to slow down in a culture addicted to urgency. It takes discipline to remain present when every platform begs for your distraction. And it demands humility to realize that the ancients, in their mythic ways, may still know something we do not. You are not asked to reject the modern world. You are asked to sanctify it, to bring soul into commerce, to bring ritual into routine, to bring silence into noise. The sacred is not somewhere else. It is hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered in how you stir your tea, how you speak to a stranger, how you carry your wounds. This is the quiet invitation. Reclaim the mythic. Restore the rhythm. Remember the real. Know that you walk not alone, but with the breath of 10,000 ancestors behind you and 10,000 yet to be born ahead. Your choices echo in both directions. You are the bridge. When you see the world rightly, through the lens of the ancient, everything changes. The tree becomes a teacher. The struggle becomes an initiation. The ordinary becomes the altar. And from that place, the distortions begin to dissolve. Not through argument, but through presence. Not by fleeing modern life, but by infusing it with soul. The sacred is not lost. It is simply waiting for your eyes to open wide enough to see it, your hands to move gently enough to touch it, and your heart to become brave enough to embody it. So now, as this journey comes to its end, the final words are not mine. They are yours. For what happens next cannot be written. It must be lived. Light a candle, take a walk, speak your truth, make something beautiful, forgive. Remember, begin again. The ancient waits, not in the past, but within you. The moment you truly listen, it will speak. And when it does, the distortion ends.